to the Next Best Series podcast, and today I'm joined by the showrunner, writer, and executive producer of The Penguin, Lauren LeFranc. Lauren, thank you for joining me today.
I'm excited to be here, Giovanni. Thanks.
I was a big fan of what Matt Reeves did with the Batman. I think the way he perceived Gotham as this very fantastical mix where I'm like, I could believe more comic characters like Mr. Freeze would exist or oddities like that in Gotham, but also feel very grounded in that criminal element that we see, especially in the Penguin. I think it blends so well. So I'm curious with you and when you're building this series with your team, how is it that you try to keep the essence of that Gotham and that continuity that Matt Reeves helped create, but also making it your own?
Well, the first thing I did is I really tried to become a student of
Mhm.
what he was doing. And so, when I came on board, there was only a script that I could read. And so I read the script again and again and again, which was very tricky also because it was under lock and key and it kept like logging me off and logging me off. And I was like, all the multiple factor authentication things I had to do. But I just really wanted to see how he wrote and how he described things and got a better sense of him as a writer. And then, I was lucky enough that when he was editing the film, he let me see the first 40 minutes of what he had done. And Oz is in the first 40 minutes a couple times. And it was the first time I got to see Colin. And that was really inspiring to me because obviously I knew Colin was in it. I did not know what this prosthetic would look like. I had a lot of questions about that. And it was just so authentic and incredible. Like, I mean, I had all the feelings that everybody had after watching the film. And I just kind of had them a little bit earlier than that they did. But there were a few scenes that Matt wrote with Oz and he said, I didn't get to dig into him emotionally in the way that I wish I had. I just didn't have the time. And so this was always meant to be a character study. And so for me, I took what little I knew of Oz. I loved that he had a sense of humor. I liked that he was unpredictable. I liked that he was just a man and that he was seeking something and he had a void to fill. And that's really what I started with. And then from there, I just started to ask myself deeper questions. I really love getting inside characters. I love digging into the psychology of them. I love trying to find the empathy for every character. That's, my job. And it's my favorite part. And so I just started to ask myself questions of what a man like this might become, like what drives him, what he's afraid of, what he wants. What he loves. And I started to think about the fact that I knew he wanted power because that was sort of the thing I was given my prompt is it's a rise to power story. But I know power really means something different to everybody. And so I knew there was a deeper want in him. So I started to explore what that deeper want might be. And he seemed like a guy who wanted to be loved and revered by everybody, but really by his mother. And that's where I started to develop Francis. And then from there, I started to build out who an interesting antagonist might be based on Matt's film and what he established there and what I was left with. And I started to build out Sophia. So obviously, Sophia Falcone in the comics is drawn a certain way, is depicted a certain way. I wanted to put my own spin on her. And I started to build out the world created Victor, which is an original character. For partly selfish reasons, I'm half Mexican, and I really wanted to see a Latino on screen
Mhm.
in this role. And so Victor became half Mexican and half Dominican. Renzi's Dominican, and just started to build out the world from there and tried to put my spin on it, mixed tones, and try to have a heartbeat at the center.
I'm glad you talked about, these various characters because I felt watching this series that Oz is very much a man or an aspiring crime lord that constitutes of the relationships in his life. Whether, I was never expecting to watch a Penguin series where mommy issues were very prominent. And then also I think his dynamic with Victor is it's very endearing until it's not. And then even, his relationship and history with Sophia and how that eventually develops into a rivalry. I'm curious, especially with Sophia, I would love to talk about that, arc. I think Cristin Milioti is brilliant in the series
Incredible.
and just, taking a character that is kind of touched upon in the comics and really breathing life into it, and especially showing someone in her position struggling to work her way upwards. I find it fascinating that, despite coming from a spot where she is the Falcone's daughter, she still has to prove her worth and her value and her fortitude compared to everyone else as much as Oz does.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, I try to tackle everything, but especially in a world like this, I found I wanted it to feel grounded. I wanted it to feel real. And I think that's the best way for people to connect to characters. When you have 8 hours, you need to build them out. And in order for people to stick with it, I think they have to be engaged with those characters and surprised by their actions, but it also should feel in line with who we know them to be. And then a little bit of the fun of long form storytelling, like television, is you get to unravel somebody more, right? Like everybody's much more complicated than they seem. So just quickly, for Victor, it's like there are interesting, when I was doing research on the mob and different crime organizations, like, of course, there's this grooming quality that older men pursue younger men to bring them into the fold, and young men, sometimes who don't have family, are really drawn in and swept up in that. So that's kind of the basis of Victor. And I just really wanted Oz and his mom to have a very distorted, dysfunctional relationship, but one rooted in somewhat Oedipal vibes of that, like, he really sees her as like the one woman that he wants. He wants her love, but he has weird issues with her, as we learn by the end of the season. But that he respects women because of his mother, because she's the smartest woman he knows. And so then enter Sophia. He has a respect for her, though Oz obviously disrespects everybody in different ways, but he is afraid of her. That was really important to me, to create a character that I hadn't really seen much of, certainly in crime dramas, in films, and in this genre that much. That, I grew up reading comic books, and I love so many films that deal with crime, and the women seem to be less developed sometimes than the men. And so really, as a fan of these genres, I just wanted to do something, when given this privileged opportunity, that felt more emotionally connective for me and for anyone like me, and so many people who aren't like me, just to create a really rich character. I mean, I try to create rich characters across the board for everybody. And Sophia, I was interested in Rosemary Kennedy. Again,
Okay.
trying to ground it. Here's this young woman who came from a very big family, very well-to-do family, just like the Falcones, and her father put her away in an asylum, and she got a lobotomy in her early 20s, and no one heard her story ever again. And there was something so devastating to me when I learned about Rosemary Kennedy originally, and I thought, what if Sophia went to Arkham and she went wrongly accused? And what would it be like to have a character go into Arkham and actually be sane? And what would they turn into when they left? And that was something, from reading comic books and doing research, I didn't feel like we'd ever seen before. Usually the characters that go into Arkham are already pretty
Yeah.
mad. And so it's hard to talk about the institution of of mental health and the positives and negatives of it. And it's hard to talk about, like, you know, someone from a well-to-do family, like the power of the Falcones
hmm
and how good it could be for her initially, and then how devastating it becomes, and to give her really like a big emotional arc.
I think it all wraps up so perfectly in the finale. I would love to point out the finale, which you wrote, which I think to a degree you did your job in making us sympathize in a way for Oz. I think that's just great writing, that in whatever television series you watch, so many great anti-heroes or villains or protagonists are just morally flawed characters. But I felt like you guys were like, okay, everyone's kind of digging Oz. We got to really nip that in the bud. And the scene with Victor in the finale where he kills him, I thought it was actually one of the bravest decisions you guys did in the series, and something I wasn't expecting, from a series that was a spin-off of the Batman film. I would love to go into the writing room and the decision behind, killing Victor. And I think also just the tragedy of it all, the license sinking into the bottom of the water, like his family. I think it's all just so depressing watching it. I was genuinely shocked you guys went that route.
Well, thank you, I guess, because I do think my job is to try my best to make people feel things, uh, whether it's devastation or to, enjoy themselves or feel emotional for whatever reason. Um, it's interesting. So before I had a writer's room, I arced out every character's emotional arc. I knew their backstory, and I knew where the show was ending. I always knew Victor would die.
Mhm.
I always knew the last shot of our film. I knew that of our show. I knew that Oz would be dancing with Eve, dressed as his mother, and his mother would be left in a sad
Hospital,
room.
yeah.
And he didn't give her what she asked for, and she's sort of trapped in this way. Because I knew that's who Oz was and that he would do those things. So I knew that going in. What I thought originally I had broken out for me in a loose shape of the season was that maybe Victor would die in the seventh episode, which is
Oh,
during Oz's backstory with his brothers. Because in my mind, it seemed like that might be really connective and that you might expect something bigger to happen in the finale, but we would put it in the penultimate episode. And then once I had the amazing group of writers that I brought in, more and more we talked a lot about Oz's actions and how the second he kills Victor, you might give up on him.
mhm.
And you can't do that yet for our story. Like you really need to believe in what he's pursuing and then feel disgusted and appalled, ideally, by what he chooses to do to Victor. And so we pushed it into eight. And then as we were breaking eight, we're like, this should come at the end. It should be one of the last things. And I always knew I wanted it to mirror Buddies in the first episode, the two guys outside
Mhm.
drinking slush puppies. And it's like another, the things we've gone through together type of moment. And that might alone make the audience feel like this is full circle. And then the hope, and I don't mean this in as dark as it's going to sound, but is to have this emotional gut punch come at you
Mhm.
right when you're feeling safe, right when you feel like the show's going to end,
Mhm.
and that twists the knife, and it is really upsetting. And I knew I wanted it to be slow and painful, and I knew I wanted it to be extend so long that hopefully the audience is like craving Oz to release him, that he has an opportunity to do so and he just doesn't. I really did want it to be emotionally devastating because Victor deserved us to feel what we felt for him as a character.
I think there's just so many times he could have gotten out, and it's just that life of crime is so alluring. And I think also just his loyalty as a character to Oz and like all the good natured aspects about him that are what caused him his downfall. I'm curious also when you said, because I think the intimacy of the death is what really gets it, like the way he is choking him out. Was that written like that way specifically as well too?
Oh yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
my God.
All that stuff is written. I know. I mean, it's interesting though, Colin and Jennifer Getzinger, the director of that episode, and I talked a lot about the staging
Hmm.
of it. And Renzi obviously too, because we wanted to make sure it felt natural, it was surprising. And so we really got into the weeds of how he would strangle him. But it was always written as that. Because I do think there's different types of kills. And I'm very aware of in a scene who I want maybe the audience to side with more. When Oz kills Alberto Falcone in the first episode, I suspect people are like, yeah, that guy deserves it.
Hmm.
And then we're with Oz emotionally when he's like, oh my God, I can't believe what I just did.
Yeah.
And that's like the whole rest of the season is Oz trying to like get his footing after doing something so impulsive in that moment. But, and then same with throughout when Sophia chooses to kill certain people, I think you're aligned with Sophia mostly. And this with Victor, I didn't want us to make excuses for Oz. I think it was really important that it didn't feel justified at all. That Victor is innocent and loyal to what your point was, and a friend to Oz, and sees him and believes in him. And that's what makes it so devastating that Oz would choose to do that. But at the same time, he feels like for him to get to a certain level of power, he can't have attachments like that.
I think, and then also you just we touched on earlier the cast is just a murderous row of great actors, and I know Colin Farrell is one of a kind. I think
Yes.
seeing him in the film you mentioned earlier, just watching that snippet before is out, just seeing the transformation is just otherworldly, where you just like, I don't recognize Colin. There's not an ounce of Colin in it. I assume that when you're writing the series, knowing that Colin is your series lead, it's got to be a great feeling knowing that your words are going to be spouted out by just one of our best working actors today.
There is no greater gift,
Hmm.
honestly. I mean, because it's funny, obviously he's very unrecognizable. We all know that now. And I know there was talk early on of like, I don't know, why is he not another actor for this role of the Penguin? To me, to what you just said, Colin is really one of the greatest actors we have. He's tremendous. And I think I fully realized how good he was through this because he does disappear. But I know what he's doing. I know he's very soulful and he's bringing empathy and he can be funny one minute and the next minute be just so dark and devastating. And those turns are hard to do with the ease that he does it. I also have the privilege of being in editing and I get to see all the different takes and
Hmm.
obviously being on set as well. And he just gives you something different every time, but it's all in line with the character. He's really tremendous, and I'm really excited that people are recognizing him so much for this. And to your point, also, our cast is stellar. They're all A-plus actors. They all come prepared. Everyone knows their lines. They're all the loveliest people. Like we all had quite a bit of fun, despite the fact that our show is so dark and violent. And it's really, truly like it's been an honor to write for Colin, for Cristin, for Dee Dee and Renzi and our whole cast. I mean, it's very privileged for me to get to write for them.
And I'm glad, the reception has just been so loving. And it's fascinating because I watched the show and I feel satisfied as where it ends. I assume wherever Matt Reeves or they decide to take the character of Oz in the future. And I'm assuming me asking if there's a season two or whatever is just going to be instantly shot down. I know Collins has expressed that sitting in a makeup chair is quite laborious for hours and it's quite
Yeah.
extensive. I'm curious do you feel satisfied if this were to be the end of Oz's arc in form of like television narrative? Do you feel satisfied of where it concluded and where whoever picks up the mantle, whether Reeves's films and the sequels or next, continues his story?
I mean, I'm really proud of what we did.
Mhm.
It's a beast of a show. It's 8 episodes. They're very long episodes. We shot in the middle of winter at night. We're trying to tell a very complex story in a genre that I don't know if people always were anticipating, for that. And it was just so joyful to do. And I really felt like the vision that I had was really fully realized. And so I'm very proud of this season. I don't know if there's more to come or not. If there's a second season of The Penguin that ever would be created, it would have to come after Matt's film, the sequel. And so I don't know enough about that at this moment to know. I know that I miss writing these characters. I knew that when we were wrapping, when we were shooting the finale, I just got sad for everybody's last scene. We
Oh,
all did. I was sad the moment when Deirdre O'Connell, she stopped speaking, right? She's gone. And like Frances was such a joy to write. I was so sad when that ended. I was devastated when Sophia ends up in Arkham. I mean, Cristin and I that night, she's like, "Can we just do this another night?" It was like 2 or 3 a.m. And I was like, "I know, I don't want this to happen to you either, but it has to happen." When Renzi, his last scene, and then Colin, it's just it shows, I think, that it's a good thing. And so I can't fully speak to the future of what could or couldn't happen yet. But I do know that I'm very proud of what we all worked together to create because it's a giant collaboration. We had an incredible crew. I mean, these people are so talented, like artists across the board. And I'm excited that not only like our cast is recognized and our writers and executive producers, but the crew, like the people who really make it and make it something special. Without them and their passion and their creativity and their artistry, this show would not be what it is.
And I think, those who watch very much notice the care and detail you and the rest of the team put into it. I think also just in a time where a lot of superhero or comic related stuff we don't know uh, is going to be great or not, I think you guys over delivered. And I'm very excited to see what everyone on this team, works on in future Avengers. Lauren, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.